Believe it or not, the Pac-12 being solid for 2026 is creating drama elsewhere. You know, why not?
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, the number one sports podcast network out there. Thank you all, especially my everydayers, for helping make that the case. What do we take away from the commission in Washington, D.C. from Friday? Was there even a major takeaway? How can anyone fix college football? That will be discussed on today's show. And I tell you, one of the most underrated quarterback situations that I'm paying attention to, that you're going to be paying attention to, it's happening in Champaign, Illinois, because they're undergoing a pretty big change. That's all on today's show, which is brought to you by our friends over at Mazda. They put that same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work. That defines you. Stay tuned for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. There's more to a Mazda because there is more to you. And there's always more to Realignment, it seems. Every single offseason, it finds a way to work itself into the news. So, for those of you that are not up to speed on the matter, I will get you there because, of course, I did a little bit, as Hermione Granger would say, of light reading over the weekend on what is happening between Conference USA and the Sun Belt, which does actually have some precedence. Now, the Sun Belt would like to add Louisiana Tech because they are losing Texas State to the Pac-12 starting in 2026. They are going to play there in all of their sports, including football. And so the Sun Belt looked around and said, well, we'd kind of like to stay at 14 teams. And so Louisiana Tech is the school that got the offer. Oddly enough, this is what is strangest about this, because it's the most public declaration of something that I would love to see snowball across college football if there's ever the grand realignment that many folks, myself included, have speculated about down the line, kind of in the 2030-ish range, which I got to tell you, recording this show in March of 2026, suddenly the 2030s just don't feel that far away. We are not as far away from that as it once felt like we did. We're on the other half of the 2020s decade, of course. Anyway, I don't need to give you a timing lesson here. But Louisiana Tech, per the bylaws of Conference USA, has to give 14 months notice that they're going to leave the conference. And they decided, about 7 months ago, but not exactly within the 14 or outside the 14-month window to notify Conference USA. And so Conference USA is coming back to them and saying, whoa. Wait, hey, hold on a minute. You can't just leave. You can't just go whenever you want. We got rules. You got to pay a certain amount of money here. Now, back when the last time the Sun Belt came and got more than a few teams from Conference USA, there was a similar arrangement that got made. And so as a result, those schools had to pay over $1 million, but less than $2 million to Conference USA, and they wound up getting into the Sun Belt on time. I think that's what is most likely to happen here. When you've got precedent for that sort of situation and you're Conference USA, I think you're a league that has to understand what you are, which is not one of the premier group of 6 conferences. You're just not, and you may never get to that particular spot. The grand realignment that I just mentioned, if that happens one day, I can see a world, especially as teams have shifted around, because Conference USA has lost a lot of teams over the years. And by the way, watch to see if a school like Tarleton State in Texas goes up to Conference USA one day. I've heard that is something they're interested in. Don't know if this creates that particular opportunity. But if there is a grand realignment one day and it just everyone pools together, you could see Conference USA schools get left behind and relegated down to the G6 ranks or getting left behind. I don't know exactly what all of that would look like. But one of the most interesting parts that struck me about all of this is that Louisiana Tech is making the case. They have said so publicly that the reason they made the case they made to the judge that they should be allowed to move and play in the Sun Belt this year rather than waiting until 2027 is that it's in the best interests of all their student athletes because there is greater regional alliance from a travel standpoint and ease of travel for their student athletes. And I was kind of refreshed for a moment. And I got just this small glimmer. It wasn't, groundbreaking in my head, but there was just this little flicker. Like when you go to turn on the stove and you hear that tick, 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 tick. I heard a couple ticks. Because this is a school that's trying to go into a better conference in the realignment space, not uncommon, but is outright saying, hey, we want to do this because it makes more sense geographically. And one day, I can absolutely see a world in which we have I'll say semi-return to regionality and geographic proximity. Where if a big handful of schools, I'm talking 60 to 70, maybe 80 schools, break off to form their own kind of league, which, I think could be great. You could have promotion relegation. That'd be really fun. But anyway, I'm not fixing that entire problem right here, right now on today's show. If you did that, then you could actually look at the region and the area, which would make it better for players, which would make it better for coaches, which would make it simpler from a television standpoint, and would make it better for fans. Because plenty of fans are not going to travel. How many Cal fans do you think are going to watch them play games on the East Coast? Other than Michael Irvin, how many Miami fans went to Berkeley in 2024 when game day was in town to watch that game? How many are making that trip? My guess, especially for a regular season game, is not very many. So I fully expect this to work out. Now, the next question you ask once Louisiana Tech, in all likelihood, does make their way into the Sun Belt, does that alter the Sun Belt standing in the college football playoff world? No, not in the slightest. They had an 8-win campaign this past year, and they have not had a double-digit win season since 2019. Now, sometimes going into a new conference can really energize a fan base, a donor base, the team. It can provide the sort of spark you're looking for. But going into the Sun Belt's a better place to be than Conference USA. No question. No question about it. Is there any world, or is there any move, frankly, that the Sun Belt can make to close the gap with the Pac-12, the American, and heck, even the Mountain West? I mean, I don't think so. I really don't. And I think if I lined up the group of 6 conferences, I'm probably putting the Sun Belt fourth. Even with the realignment that's happened in the Mountain West, with a lot of those schools going to the Pac-12, but the Mountain West is solidified as a football conference, I'd probably put the Mountain West third. I'd still probably put them third. It's closer, of course, because it's a very different looking league, but I'd say Pac-12 first, American second, and Mountain West third. If you disagree, leave your thoughts in the YouTube comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, however you want to get in touch. Speaking of a big picture look at college football, which we do a lot here on Locked On College Football, did anything happen on Friday? Will anything happen? What should happen? All that is coming up next. First, this episode brought to you by our friends at 5 Hour Energy. Welcome to the 5 Hour Energy Flavor Draft with 18 different flavors to choose from, including new options like Confetti Craze, Fruity Rainbow, or Cotton Candy. There really is something for everyone. The board is set, flavors are ready, and my number one pick coming off the board with the first selection in the 2026 5 Hour Energy Locked On Flavor Draft is strawberry watermelon. Incredibly low risk, major upside as well. Maybe not as high of upside as some other prospects, but still number one worthy, because this is a can't miss prospect. You cannot go wrong. If you want something on the sweeter side, maybe you're a confetti craze sort of person. Find your new favorite flavor of 5-Hour Energy shots available online at 5hourenergy.com or Amazon. Again, 5hourenergy.com or Amazon. Find your favorite flavor of 5-Hour Energy today. This episode also brought to you by our friends over at Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. Here is a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now. Support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. You need to hire. That is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. An executive order to save all of college sports. Well, that sounds like a daunting task. If there was one guy that I would trust to do it above anyone else, it'd be Jake Hatch of Locked On BYU Cougars. So he's here to discuss. Look, there was a big panel at the White House. The president hosted the roundtable about college sports and got input from, 27 different people, give or take.
There were upwards of 50 people there, but not all spoke, but yeah.
Yeah, Nick Saban was among those that spoke. Urban Meyer spoke. You had Power 4 athletic directors, Notre Dame's athletic director. I mean, a lot of cooks in the kitchen there was kind of my takeaway going into it. I was sitting there going, look, I'm not opposed to the idea, frankly. I know that people, when the government thinks about getting involved in college sports, have an averse take. I get it. I just don't know if there's a better solution, because what we're doing is not tenable. You might create new problems, but you have to figure out a way to fix the ones that we currently have. So I wasn't expecting very much from Friday's meeting. Were you expecting anything, Jake? And how did this meet your expectations, or not meet, or just kind of, it was just kind of a thing that happened?
Well, I always expected that Trump would say that he was going to do something, and that means in this case he's going to say he's going to put together an executive order. And there was a very valid question asked. I don't remember who it was. Asked him, like, how's this executive order you're about to issue differ from the one you already put out? He said, well, this one's more comprehensive. And I'm like, okay, well, it's more comprehensive, but it's not binding. And that's the issue I have with all of this, Spencer, is you have got all these Power 4 commissioners. You've got Charlie Baker there, the president of the NCAA. You've got multiple former head coaches like Nick Saban, Urban Meyer. You mentioned too many cooks in the kitchen. That's exactly what this is. You have all these people who have all their self-interests. And the problem is, until you can get those people out of the way and get everybody on the same page, nothing is going to change.
The idea of one order from the president to just fix it, I don't think that's feasible for anyone to try and undertake. It seems like there would need to be congressional involvement, which could get even messier and draw out the process even longer, of course. But if I were, let's you and I be the president for a moment, and let's craft our own respective executive orders that let's also assume for a moment, for the sake of argument, that they would be enforceable, because as we're seeing, the NCAA, I'm probably going to touch on this more tomorrow on my show, the NCAA is trying to go after Trinidad Chambliss again. I don't know who that guy insulted, but it was somebody's mom somewhere. I mean, he said the wrong thing, and we just don't know about it. I mean, they don't want that guy playing college football, but he just went to a judge, of course, and said, well, this isn't, and I don't think there's a guarantee that any purely executive order would have a binding component to it. But you know what? Let's just pretend. So here's what I would do. My President McLaughlin's executive order to fix college sports would mandate that there is no acquisition or loss of players on your roster while the season is ongoing for any point in time. We are getting rid of the early signing day in December. We're putting it back in February to make it a national holiday as it should be. We're putting the transfer portal at least 10 days after the national championship is played, which will be in early January, no later than January 8th, but probably January 1st, 2nd, 3rd, somewhere around there. And then this is another one. I don't know if NIL collectives can stay, but I know that paying players should stay and has to stay. So if we're going to do that, we're going to make sure that anyone who's claiming to be an agent, as in other sporting leagues, is a licensed agent capable of acting on a player's behalf in a formal capacity, at the very least. So that's where I would start, and then I would cap the number of free transfers that a player can have to 2. I would cap it to 2 and say only exception is if your head coach leaves. Then you can go. That's at least where I would start with mine. Where would you start with President Hatch? Ooh, there's a good ring to it. President Hatch's executive order to save college sports.
Well, I'm going to change your transfer rule. I'm going to say it's one free transfer outside of a head coach leaving. I think you get the one time, and then you got to sit out. I think that there needs to be a higher priority on players sticking around the program they're in. So I'll give you one free transfer. The other thing I will say is I will, in my executive order, essentially tell Congress, figure it out. If this needs congressional approval, because that meeting did mention that the only way an antitrust exemption can come for the NCAA, which they're practically begging for, it has to be an act of Congress to get them that. Now, do I think they necessarily need it? Not necessarily, but if they're gonna request that, I put it and say, hey, Congress, get on this. Make it a bipartisan issue, because we have both Republicans and Democrats who are in that meeting saying they're willing to work together. Well, let's see if they're actually willing to do that. So I'd push them on that. I will also add this, Spencer. When it comes to compensation for players, I'm with you. Get rid of collectives, but revenue share still needs to be a part of this. My issue is if you're going to ultimately pay players, there's got to be some sort of a collective bargaining agreement in place, and that probably requires that antitrust exemption to really come to fruition. But there needs to be guardrails put on how much players can make. And I also say, if you want to have collectives, guess what? They need to be highly regulated, kind of what you're talking about with agents. My thought is you make it pure NIL. If there is a player out there, let's say a car dealership or a company wants to be in a NIL relationship, the pure form of it, pure capitalism, as we heard Urban Meyer talk about, let them do that. But you can't have these just collectives just paying players. That has to be regulated very, very highly. So those are probably some of the things I would add to this. But to your point, I just don't know that we're ever going to get everybody on the same page to sign off on this. But I would hope that, if I were able to be president for a day, I'd be pushing all that through.
I think there's a lot of sensible stuff that was just said on this particular program by my guest, Jake Hatch, of course. Here's another notion, kind of gets at what you said, and I've discussed it on the show before. Would you institute a salary cap in college sports? Because I'm a big baseball fan, and I don't think the Dodgers are overall good for Major League Baseball, in the same way that I didn't feel like the Warriors having KD join their 73-win team was good for the NBA. By the way, it wasn't. All of that, and the unlimited player mobility in the NBA has not been good for the league. Television ratings haven't been what they used to be. So I come down on pro salary cap. I'm not saying it should be, $10 million for a team or anything like that, because I do think there still should be a reward for those that can raise the money and put that level of investment in, because it does take a lot of work, as you know, behind the scenes from an administrative level, and you have to have people that are willing to support it. But A salary cap probably makes its way into my ideal executive order.
Yeah, I'm with you on probably trying to implement it, but as I mentioned, you're going to have to probably have an antitrust exemption put into place to have that to get people to sign off on it. So it's kind of a two-sided issue on that front, but I'm with you. And even if you want to kind of go with the NBA model where you have a luxury tax, if a team wants to go above that cap, well, guess what? You impose those penalties, and if they're willing to pay through the nose for that, go right on ahead.
Yeah. Anything else stand out to you? You told me before we hopped on that you listened to the whole 2+ hours. I couldn't even get through that much. That's just that was just a lot. But was there anything that made you feel okay, maybe something actually could happen on this front?
Well, we had some of the legislators, I think it was the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, I got his name right, did say that he has bipartisan support for I think it was the SCORE Act or whatever act they were talking about. And if that's true, well, let's get a move on there. Like, let's make this happen. Now, Cody Campbell was also there, the mega booster from Texas Tech, who's been pushing for the pooling of media rights. It was very interesting to hear him talk about the fact that he's willing to come to the table and talk to more legislators if they want to talk about what he's got proposed out there. Here's the deal. A lot of people said a lot of things in those meetings, and I would take them if they're serious about wanting to talk across party lines and have these communications among these different parties, Spencer. Let's have those communications. That is what needs to come out of this, because a lot of people said a lot of stuff in that meeting, and if they're going to be taken at face value, there's going to be a lot more conversations to be had.
With this whole endeavor, I feel like I am creeping through the woods to try to find buried treasure. Well, I am cautiously just going, okay, little here, gonna check around that tree, make sure there's nothing scary there. Okay, nothing. What was that? What was that? Whoa. But I know where the goal is. For me in my head, I'm getting there very slowly. Like, all right, let's ease into it. Let's see how it goes. This is the first step.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that they're talking about is like President Trump was saying, I'm going to make an executive order, but then they're like, well, we're going to push in Congress for our two bills of legislation that we want to do. So if it's going to come on two fronts, maybe it has a net impact where actually something happens. Because I'm not in favor of one side or the other really pushing on this, Spencer. If both sides want to push equally, I'm all for it. Because if it can push anything through, that's what needs to happen. It needs to be less talk and more action overall.
Jake Hatch, Locked On BYU Cougars. Great, as always. We are pivoting to Champaign, Illinois. How did the Illini move on from one of the best they've ever had at quarterback? First, this episode brought to you by our friends at Mazda. This is Mazda's moving the game forward. For those who show there's more to the score than what's on the screen. You know what? I'm going to go way off the beaten path or onto the beaten path, or I don't even know exactly how that expression is supposed to go. This is a college football show. Can I go to the World Baseball Classic? Can I shout out my guy, Julio Rodriguez, who hit his first home run of the big event not long ago? How about the number of moments that have already shown up in that outstanding event? Those sorts of moments do more than just change the scoreboard. They remind us what it really takes to raise the bar. It's the extra work off the field, dialing in every detail, giving it that extra fire, that grit, and I never quit mentality. They put the same passion into every model at Mazda. Highlights make the reel. But what it took to get there makes it count. There's more to a Mazda because there is more to you. A guy who has been quietly one of the most effective quarterbacks in college football isn't here anymore. No 9th year for Luke Altmyer at Illinois. Sunny Verma of Locked On Illini is here to discuss. So it's a new era in Champaign, Sunny. What does that era actually look like behind center?
We're all anxious and waiting to see. Katin's a guy who, you're talking about replacing Luke Altmyer, a guy who's going to be playing on Sundays in the future. As you said, Luke was one of the more unheralded quarterbacks over the last couple of years. A guy who Illinois fans, in my argument, is he's the best Illini quarterback of my lifetime. He's right up there when it comes to all the record books. But now things are going to be a little bit different. Obviously, Brett Bielema, they decided to go hard towards the transfer portal. They do have as good of a quarterback room since I remember. You're talking probably since like the early 2000s since the quarterback room has been this good. They've got young talent back there, but I think Brett understands that Illinois can't rebuild anymore. In the modern era of college football with the transfer portal, it's basically you're reloading constantly. And so they eyed Katin Houser, apparently a kid who they've had their eyes on immediately. He was their number one target. They got him, and he plays a little different than Luke. I think he's got more of a gunning arm, and he's not going to win games with his legs like Luke Altmyer is, but he's certainly going to have the weapons here in Champaign next season. So I'm pretty excited to see how he does.
Do you think that his production this year can match what Altmyer gave the Illini over the last couple seasons? Let's just talk throwing the ball here. Do you think he is as capable of a passer?
I mean, they have different strengths, right? Katin's, I think, from what I've seen, more of a deep ball throw, and I think he can connect on those balls better than Luke is going to be able to. It's hard. I don't want to build too high of expectations of Houser just because 30 seconds ago, I just said that, in my opinion, Luke Altmyer was the greatest quarterback that I remember for the Illini. So that can't be the standard necessarily moving forward. But my expectations are he's going to be in the top half of the Big Ten. And if with the running back room that we have, with the wide receivers that we have, I think that's going to be good enough.
Why do you feel so good about that talent around him?
Well, you're just talking about a running backs room. Obviously, you're going to lose Caden Fagan, who's actually going to switch over to be a tight end this season, which was very interesting news. But besides that, you have Khalil Valentine, who's going to be entering his junior year. I think he's going to be mentioned as a potential all Big Ten honorable mention by the end of the year. The kid is electric. Then you have Aiden Lawfrey also coming right behind them. There's not many teams in the country that have a 1-2 combo like that. And then when you think of the wide receiver rooms, you have Colin Dixon, you have Hudson Clement, you're going to have the newcomer Alex Perry. It's just there's a lot of talent, and you have Barry Lundy Jr. still in calling plays for the Illini, and he's, in my opinion, one of the best offensive coordinators, not just in the Big Ten Conference, but in the entire country. Brett trusts him. The system has been working, and the results show it. And so at this point, I don't have any reason to think that things are going to change anytime soon.
Last year, I was very high on the Illini, and it's not as if they had, a Clemson, Penn State level letdown relative to what the expectations were. I, perhaps infamously, now that we have seen the season play out, picked them to win 10 regular season games a year ago. They managed to win 8, and of course, still got to win over the SEC in the bowl game. But bowl games only count when people want them to, right? That's the rule. They don't count unless they go the way that certain folks want them to. So I was high on Illinois going into last year, partially because Luke Altmyer was there, and I liked what they had coming back, and I thought they'd had a good season the year prior. What disappointed me the most about the Illini last year, especially with Brett Bielema, who's a very, dig your heels in, hard-nosed, smash mouth sort of guy. Boy, they look soft on defense to me. I mean, there was just not enough physicality at the line of scrimmage. There was not enough physicality really coming from anywhere, I think, compared to what Brett Bielema wants to run there in Champaign. So go opposite Katin Houser for a moment. Is he going to have a defense that can support him better than they supported Luke Altmyer a season ago? Because it felt like at times Altmyer was kind of saving the Illini. You think back to that USC game, for example, one of the best moments of the year for Illinois. And that was a game where Luke Altmyer just kind of out-dueled, had the ball last against Jaden Maiava in the USC offense because they had no one to stop Mekhi Lemon or slow him down. They had no one to consistently keep Jaden Maiava under pressure. So do you think that Katin Houser will be well supported on the other side of the ball?
Well, I'll tell you, Spencer, there's one guy who agreed with you, and that's the guy in charge, Brett Bielema. There's a reason that Aaron Henry, who's been the defensive coordinator for the past 3 seasons, is now going to be coaching the secondary in South Bend at Notre Dame. Brett Bielema decided to go completely different. He hired Bobby Hauck, a legend, I know, on this show. Mm-hmm. And he's installing something different. Brett Bielema's talked about this in media sessions over the past couple of weeks. He feels like Illinois all of a sudden has become very easy to game plan for because when he brought in Ryan Walters and this defense, it was a unique defense in the Big Ten Conference. But now, as of this last year, he said the majority of the Big Ten Conference kind of plays the same sort of defense. And so the game planning got easier. They're switching over to a 3-3-5 scheme. How that's going to work out, I don't know. As confident as I am sitting here in front of you telling you that I like what the offense is going to bring next season, I'm not quite as confident when it comes to the defensive side. Obviously, Houck is a legend when it comes to the game of college football, and I don't think there's many universities out there that have the football knowledge in one locker room that Illinois has between Brett and Bobby Houck. But, you know, they've been very strategic with their implementing. They've got members of Houck's former staff in Montana at every level, at the defensive line, linebackers, coaching the secondary. So even though the players aren't necessarily going to be sure of the way you speak and the words, buzzwords or whatnot, the coaching staff is going to be there. And hopefully the teaching transition works. But obviously you're right. Like, something needed to change. The offense constantly had to bail out the defense, not just last year, but even the year before. And Brett Bielema recognized it, and he's hoping that Bobby is going to be the guy to change things around.
I want to bring this back to Katin Houser. Compared to the season Luke Altmyer had a year ago, do you expect him to be in the same range statistically, better or worse than what he was?
It's hard because Illinois had all 5 offensive linemen returning last year. You had the same running backs room last year, and then you had star wide receivers. This year, you're going to see which wide receivers are going to be able to make the leap. Obviously, there's a lot of talent in that room, but who is, Colin Dixon able to make that jump to being your number 1 this year? I don't think my expectations should be that high, but I don't think they're going to be too far off either. Caden's the guy who I think, especially in particular at the goal line, he's, from the tape I watched, he can absolutely sneak those in and get touchdowns that way. Again, I don't know if he's the short and middle of the field thrower that Luke Altmyer was, but I think you're going to see a lot more bombs. And you know what? Sometimes those are fun to watch too.
Yeah, they definitely are. But when I think of that Illinois offense last year, they had a lot of really effective RPOs, and that's something that I think in that system, if they really want to keep it the same, Houser is going to have to learn to be prolific. It's the old Twitter joke. Get ready to learn blank, buddy, because you're gonna figure this out whether you like it or not. Sunny Verma, Locked On Illini. We always like having him on, and that is it for today's show. I appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.